So, yeah, let's start with like the generic stuff. So, can you just like give like a quick overview of the Dencun upgrade and what it means for Ethereum?
Yeah, Dencun is the combination of two different names, Deneb and Cancun. And Deneb is for the proof of stake Ethereum side of things. You have to run something called a consensus client. And Cancun is for the execution side, which is everything smart contract related. And it's the combination of these two uh, names together to make Dencun. So what for the consensus side, I believe it's always a star name and it's just alphabetical.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the execution side, it's based off of the uh, dev connect and dev con locations.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So that's a little bit of background on the name of Dencun.
Mm-hmm.
And Ethereum has had all these like hard forks in the past. The last one that we had was the Capella Shanghai hard fork, which I don't think they combined the names for that one, but that's what enabled Ethereum withdraws for proof of stake.
Mm-hmm.
So each of these upgrades, we tried to have one major feature for the Ethereum chain and then a bunch of smaller ones. So,
Got it.
so for this
So, like,
one,
what are, yeah, I
oh,
was
go
gonna
ahead.
ask, like, what are the main technical improvements in this one? Like, the big one, and then what are some of the smaller ones?
Yeah. So the big one that's coming is something called EIP 4844 or proto-dank
Mm-hmm.
sharding or blobs, as a lot of people refer to it as.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, what it's doing is it's giving a little bit of extra space within a certain period of the blockchain so that L2's layer 2 blockchains like Optimism or Arbitrum or Starknet can access a little bit of extra room, which will then increase scalability in the Ethereum ecosystem. And so there's really two ways to increase scalability in Ethereum, which just means we want to be able to process more people's transactions without vastly increasing the fees associated, because everyone is just bidding for the space that's inside of each block. And so with this, hopefully, if you're using one of these L2 products, it will greatly reduce some of those fees because now you've increased a bit of size. And so you can either make the blockchain's blocks go faster, which means the network needs to create more blocks. For Ethereum,
Mm-hmm.
it's 12 seconds per block. And so one way to think about it is like if we reduce that to 10 seconds, then that would mean that we're processing more data because we are processing more blocks. The other way to think about it is we can increase the size of the block. So I believe we'll need to double check on this. 128 kilobytes for transaction call data. for your regular block, but now you basically have an additional 128 for each blob up to 6 blobs with a target of 3 blobs. And these blobs, that's the extra data on top of the block that we can use for L2s. But increasing the size of these blocks or adding this extra blob data, it increases the requirements for being a node runner, because you have to process more data over the network now. You have to save more data on your computer.
You're talking about running like a mainnet node, right? Like an L1 node.
Right. So if you increase the block size in any way, or you added like metadata like this, then it increases like hardware requirements, because you have to do all of these things within a certain time span.
Right.
And that sort of compromises on Ethereum's core thesis of being decentralized and not needing supercomputers to run the network. So this middle ground that we fell into is, let's increase the amount of data that these blocks can process by adding on these blobs, but only have node runners retain it for 18 days. So there's a limited retention period. So the at least in sort of in terms of the storage and networking costs, it's capped. It's capped at the data within those dates in the retention period. And hopefully that means that there isn't really much of a new requirement for people that are already staking or running nodes.
Running validators. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So does this, to clarify, does this allow like layer twos to process like more transactions per second, to like have like basically more data stuffed into like a fraud proof or something like that? Or does it just make it cheaper to submit what they're already doing?
It'll allow for more data to be submitted at one time from these L2s. So that's where it gets like, it's potentially, with quotes, reducing gas, because it's sort of like economies of scale. If you have more transactions to process, and then you get this space, and the space sort of has its own pricing model, then potentially you can get in a lot more data for a cheaper cost.
Got it.
That being said, it'll be interesting to see what happens with L2s that might not have as much transaction, as many transactions at certain periods. So it's only if you go over certain limits is it economical to bid for blob space. And it can vary, again, from no blobs to up to 6 blobs. And the target is 3. So when it goes over 3 blobs, then the price of the blobs get a lot more expensive. So you want to have as many transactions as you can to take advantage of that, but also for for these L2 products, if they don't have enough transactions, maybe they want to wait to group up more transactions before they post it, which also has a bad user experience
From
because
what
they're
perspective?
posting less often to the L1.
Does that impact like the UX of like transacting on the L2, or is it just like you have less security guarantees in terms of like this being like a valid transaction?
I think it affects both
Mm-hmm.
because there's a potential for reorging on
Mm-hmm.
your L2 depending on how it's architected. So if you wait and you group it up and you post it later, then maybe there isn't like certain security guarantees, and depending on how the L2 product works, then you might get reorgs and that kind of thing, which is never great.
Right, right. So then like how is Arbitrum like taking advantage of these upgrades? Like how are you guys gonna like, improve, or are you gonna scale up throughput? Yeah, I guess like what else is being done there?
Yeah, so taking advantage of that is what Arbitrum Atlas does, and
Okay.
that's being voted on. That's going to be the new upgrade to the Arbitrum side of things. And it
And
should
just
come
to
out.
be clear,
Yeah,
like every L2 has to sort of have their own upgrade to take advantage of this new like blob space, right?
that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So because these blobs don't exist right now,
Mm-hmm.
everyone just uses call data, which is your
Mm-hmm.
typical transaction data
Right.
for their batch posting. And so in order to take advantage of this, uh, they need to upgrade their systems to use these blob transactions, which is it's going to be a new type of transaction on Ethereum.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then all the if it's an optimistic rollup, then you have to have uh, fraud proofs updated to somehow use blobs.
Got it. Does this affect like other types of like smart contracts, like optimistic rollup type smart contracts? Like, is there any work that has to be done there, or are those just going to be like supported?
So this data, what's interesting about this data is it can't be used from a smart contract. So it's
Okay.
not something that the EVM has access to.
Okay.
Um, but uh, whoever's using it can use some of the meta information that's inside to then get the information outside.
So it's specifically designed for rollups, essentially.
It's specifically designed for rollups.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and
Cool.
none
So
of this
like,
data gets executed in the EVM either.
got it. Okay, that's an important distinction. So I think I like kind of cut you off before on like your Arbitrum stuff. So like, what is the, I guess, roadmap for like Arbitrum taking advantage of 4844?
Yeah, it's currently being voted on. So as soon as it goes through votes, then uh, the Arbitrum nodes get upgraded, and
Hmm.
they just wait for the activation on mainnet. And for Ethereum mainnet, it's activating, I believe it's March 13th, UTC, like 1 p.m. ish.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. And this will affect all like of Arbitrum's different like roll-up types like Nova, One, Orbit, like all those things will be able to take advantage of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. One is Arbitrum 1 is the one that will primarily take advantage of this. And
Mm-hmm.
Nova actually doesn't use Ethereum for its data availability. So it's
Gotcha,
not
gotcha.
going to use this.
Got it. Okay,
Yeah, but that was a good
that
question.
makes sense. Okay. Um, let's see. So, what are some of the other like enhancements included in Dencun? Like some of the smaller stuff. Can you talk
Yeah,
about that stuff?
yeah. So let's see. There's a lot of user experience improvements, such as transient storage. So right now, if you write a smart contract and you don't want to like store that data forever, there's no like good there's no other like data structure to use for that. But now you sort of have like a cache for your while your transaction is running,
Mm-hmm.
to use some extra space to do some kind of processing. So
Cool.
that's one. Let's see. Some other user experience ones. We have a max epoch churn limit, which I think for most viewers, it might, or most people looking at the interview, it might not make a lot of sense. But
Mm-hmm.
Ethereum, all the Ethereum nodes have redundant data right now for the Ethereum blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
And this is referred to as like the state of the chain. And the amount of data that's stored in it is growing, increasing by quite a bit. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the um, I, a lot of the data on the consensus side of things is because of validator state, which is like if you want to stake in Ethereum, it needs the chain needs to store the information about your validator, whether it's doing a good job or not doing a good job, how much money it has, uh, all of those, all of that data, and um, the effectiveness of the stake is currently capped at 32 ETH. So if you're this big staking provider, then you have to create all of these validators for each set of 32 ETH that you get. And that increases the state of the chain. And because of how many uh, people want to stake stake their ETH to earn some yield, it increases the state continuously, but
Mm-hmm.
the state never reduces when you exit. So even if your validator is exited and you want to take your money out of the stake, the
Mm-hmm.
information about that stake remains on the chain. And
And there's no reason for it to exist. Like there's no use for it at that point.
there is a use, well, there is a use for it to reach consensus. Right
Okay.
now, there isn't like a good mechanism to reuse the validators, the space after they exited, and you can't just like delete data from the blockchain. So our like band-aid solution right now until another upgrade is to just cap that limit of how many validators get activated within a certain period or sort of leave. So that so adding that cap will sort of slow down this problem.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Any other mentionable improvements, or those are kind of the main things?
Yeah, there's a couple other small ones. One around signed validator exits. So before you could only sign for the current upgrade, and I think the previous one, but you can't sign for a future upgrade. And now it doesn't really matter which upgrade you're on to exit your validator, because otherwise you have to wait for the upgrade to happen.
Okay.
And then submit it. Or if you submitted it like right before the upgrade and the network doesn't process your exit, then it just makes it invalid and you got to do it again. So
Right.
like kicks you out of the line and then makes you do it again, which is like not a great user experience.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that one. And then there's one more around beacon block root in the EVM. So now there's going to be this smart contract that will keep track of the beacon chain's block root. And that helps a lot of more like infrastructure people, but they can then access it from the smart contract to get certain information about how much they can trust the network state without it being like reorged and that kind of thing.
Got it. Okay. In terms of like what kind of things this would unlock for, this upgrade as a whole, like what are some of the most immediate unlocks? Is it just about like creating experiences like that, require lower transaction fees that are going to mainly benefit from this? So more like high throughput applications, or are there any other things that like you've seen that are going to be able to be done now that were previously sort of like either not possible or were just not good experiences?
Yeah, that's something that we'll sort of have to wait to see what happens. But it's paving the way for a lot of things in the game industry and entertainment industry. Maybe there's certain types of games that it would be too expensive to run previous.
Hmm.
So, but still be able to leverage the ecosystem of Ethereum, because it's a vast ecosystem. So definitely in that space. And then this app chain thesis, I'm interested in seeing where this goes.
Yeah.
And there's research being done around blob sharing. So this issue that I mentioned before, where if your chain doesn't have enough transactions, maybe you can't take advantage of this extra space, the blobs, and you might have to have this weird trade-off where you don't know if you should post more often or if you should wait and collect more transactions before you post. But if you shared that space with other L2s or L3s, can you benefit from both worlds? I guess we'll see what happens in terms of this like app chain thesis, but I think app chains is where the next cycle will will sort of look at.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I have like somewhat related questions to that thesis. One, the one thing just on transaction fees is like one thing that like Brian Armstrong from Coinbase has said is like the goal is to get like to sub penny transaction fees. Like, is this the upgrade that enables that, or is like it's we're still not quite there? Like you think in the next like couple of years?
It's hard to say where we are in this phase. I mean, there's a lot of other data availability solutions coming out.
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
Celestia and Eigenlayer, but it's really around this like trust, like how much do you want to trust that for your data availability versus trusting Ethereum mainnet. But
Right.
definitely, like it's paving the road towards much cheaper transactions down the road. Um,
Yeah.
we might get to that number already with this, but
Hmm.
we'll have to see what happens with the economics of blobs and bidding for blobs and what. Yeah, this we'll have to see how people use it, and people might use it in very creative ways. So uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
That makes total sense. Now on along the lines of the app chain thesis, so if that plays out and we have like, dozens, hundreds of new L2s app chains, I know there's a couple of frameworks for retaining like composability and interoperability between all these chains. I think like Arbitrum's thing is like Orbit, right? OP has like the OP stack and the OP super chain framework. Um, where are we in those roadmaps to like actually these things becoming realities? And like off the top of your head, like what are some of the challenges to, making that work?
yeah. So Orbit's already out. There's Orbit L2s and L3s, so it doesn't have to be um, just one or the other. And
Hmm.
not only that, it um, it enables things like using your custom gas token, so you're not like set to use ETH, which is
Hmm.
interesting, which might create new types of problems, but it also enables a lot of interest interesting things if you end up doing that. Um, but with these stacks, I guess one of the challenges is what kind of consensus do you have to have the same consensus mechanism for all of these products? Right now, they, at least for Arbitrum, it's using optimistic. They're all optimistic rollups, but I
Right.
guess they don't have to be. So that'll be interesting if you end up using other kinds of uh, consensus models. And I've also heard things like, does it have does it have to be um, just EVM? Can it be more or less than EVM? And like for Arbitrum, there's Arbitrum Stylus, which isn't out on mainnet yet, but
Hmm.
it lets you write smart contracts in other languages besides Solidity and Viper
Hmm.
for Arbitrum chains. And
Okay.
so that yeah, that'll be interesting how that aspect evolves. And I don't know, maybe another interesting I don't know why we would do it this way, or like why someone would choose to do it, but you can have like Arbitrum Orbit chains on other EVM compatible chains. So you can have like
Yeah. Okay.
Arbitrum Orbit on Base or Arbitrum Orbit on Optimism. Um, I'm not totally sure personally, I'm not totally sure like why you would want
Yeah,
need to do that, or maybe like you want to take it, you want to connect with that ecosystem, but you like the Arbitrum tech stack.
right.
Uh, I think there will be interesting opportunities and problems with that.
Definitely. I guess like, you know, like the more you mix and match these things, I think probably the more inevitably you got to rely on like bridging and, you know, just sort of being stuck on in certain ecosystems. Like what needs to be shared across like multiple like rollup frameworks to enable like kind of like true cross-chain compatibility where you can do like an atomic, you know, transaction that like has logic on one side and you know the output is on like a different chain. Do you have like a sense of that? Is that something like Arbitrum is like discussed or thought about?
Um, that's a little bit out of my understanding, since I only work on the L1 side of things.
Got it.
But maybe there will be more possibilities to do that kind of thing if you have access to strong stronger languages than Solidity and Viper. Like if you maybe there's certain types of other kinds of cryptography maybe that will help enable some of this,
Hmm.
that you can access through other languages.
Got it.
This is just like throwing like guesses.
Totally, totally.
It's definitely an issue, but it's an even bigger issue for you to have to rely on something like Solidity and Viper to do those things.
Totally, totally. That makes sense. Um, cool. I think like just like final thoughts is okay. So we have Dencun coming up in like literally like a couple weeks here.
Yeah.
What is the has the next big upgrade already been talked about? Like, do you have any sort of insight into what are going to be the priorities in that one?
Yeah. Yeah. So the next big upgrade is Electra Prog. We haven't um decided on the exact combination name yet. Um but it there's a couple things that are coming with that. We have a blog post on a Medium about what the Prism team aligns with. Um, but there's a lot of different directions that we can go,
Hmm.
but there's trade-offs with each of those because the next upgrade, we're sort of wanting it to be later this year, which hasn't happened in Ethereum yet, where you have two hard forks in one
One
year.
year. Hmm.
Um, so some of the smaller ones are like you can kick off validator exits the from an Ethereum address. That's not possible right now, and there's some risks to eigenlayer and similar products like restaking
Hmm.
from this issue that you can't
Interesting.
kick off validator exits until that happens. So there's things like that. There's some other small ones, but beyond that, uh, it gets into like what are the priorities for Ethereum? Is it more scalability? Do we need to have more transactions at cheaper costs on Ethereum? And uh, get us another step closer to proposer builder separation, which is essentially like you can still run your own home computer to be a validator or staker, but the block production is sort of outsourced in a trustful or in a trustless way to some supercomputer that will do the processing of figuring out what transactions go in and sort of bid to allow you as the validator to add that block. So is scalability the important feature here, or is censorship the next thing that we need to solve, where you would like to force the builder to include certain transactions without the trade-off of losing MEV rewards.
Makes sense.
So that's another thing that is being looked at through EPBS and inclusion lists. Or is it the worrying state increase? I talked a little bit about this temporary solution that we added for the churn limit, but one of the better solutions is to increase the max effective balance and be able to reuse validator indices so that the state doesn't grow as much as sort of what we're afraid it grows right now. So there's different paths for all this, but it's very ambitious to go for any of them in the same year. And the big problem with going with any of these and try to do it in the same year or try to do it early next year is we don't want to get in the way of Verkle trees and EOF. So Verkle trees is getting into like statelessness for Ethereum. And so right now, everybody has to store all of the data for Ethereum, essentially, if you want to access certain things. In the future, can you just store a portion of Ethereum? And then, if you need to access something archival, then you can pay a fee to somebody that actually archives it and can provide that to you. And so you don't need, it's not as expensive to be a node runner.
Got it. So there would be a bit of a centralizing force on maybe archiving then, because you would have like these beefy archive nodes that would be kind of like a side thing of the chain.
Yeah. So how can we allow for some centralization there, but have added like cryptographic security for it?
Got it.
Yeah. And that's something that I think everyone wants for 2025. So some of these other big efforts, while they're important, we also don't want it to get in the way of that.
Makes sense. And since we're on the roadmap talk, my final thought is, where is like full dank sharding in terms of priority and development, and just like I guess like when potentially would that be coming along?
Yeah, I guess the first question is like, do we need it yet?
Right.
Are there applications waiting for the scalability need or scalability features that it provides? So in order to get to that, we have to have more scalability for Ethereum. See how it handles it. We have to take advantage of it's related to the blobs, but the underlying sort of cryptography that it uses is called KCG commitments. And what's nice about that is it allows you to do something called erasure coding. And if you ever had like a hard drive, like a RAID hard drive before, and you wanted to replicate your data, so like if one hard drive breaks, like your system still has all the data. That's what we want to do with Ethereum, to essentially like make the network itself this giant CD where like if part of it gets scratched and loses the data, you still have access to the whole thing and you can confidently access everything. We need to get to data sampling instead of this replication that where everybody has the data, and then we have to be able to increase the amount of storage. Like right now it's 6 blobs, but like maybe in the future, like each blob is a megabyte and like there's 64 blobs. So there's a future that where we can increase all of those things. But when we do that, we also want to increase the security side of things to make sure that everything's not, centralized. It continues the decentralized ethos by trying to prevent censorship. So there needs to be more censorship resistant features. And so it's like multifaceted. You gotta like increase this thing, which then creates problems over there. And then, so we're still a while away from like full dank sharding, which is what this proposer builder separation concept is. But maybe through this process of releasing each of these features, there will be better ideas to approaching this, because Ethereum wasn't always on this roll-up centric roadmap. So maybe there's some better ideas to handling this stuff.
So one thing I was thinking of the past couple of days, I think it came up as a subject maybe like a month ago on like crypto Twitter, was increasing the gas limit on mainnet to relieve some stress as well. Like, do you have any opinions on that? Like, can that be used concurrently with like EIP 4844 to drive down TX fees even lower? Or are those two trade-offs too heavy in terms of like node requirements?
So it's not coming in Dencun, but I think it's on the table for discussion.
Because that one doesn't require, it wouldn't require like a hard fork, right? It would just be like validators just need to concurrently agree to increase the gas limit.
Right. And it would take some time to get there. So there's like a limit to how much the gas limit can increase over a certain period of time. So it's more like social consensus, but I am not totally sure where we're at in terms of that debate.
That makes sense. Maybe it's a topic that'll keep coming up for discussion, as this year goes on.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, we definitely covered the upgrades in detail, and then we went off, and I could go off in 100 different directions, but I think this is probably good enough for today.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for your time, man.
Cool. Thanks, Vlad.